It's one of the most extraordinary moments in Britain's history. Prime Minister Boris Johnson refusing calls from his own cabinet to resign. Nine's Brett McLeod is outside the Prime Minister's residence. Brett, the Queen could be dragged into this mess.
Yeah, this is the site of one of the highest wind speeds ever recorded by man.
Arson could be the cause of a fire at the Sydney home of controversial comedian, commentator and YouTuber Friendly Geordies.
Supine protoplasmic invertebrate jellies.
And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 19 of the Fences podcast. I'm, of course, one of your hosts, as per usual, William Brooke, and I'm sitting here with the lovely Tiago across from me.
Oh, hello there, Will.
Yes, hello. I see we have some new scenery behind us.
Yeah,
Tiago.
we've got the lovely Buddha baby right there.
I was going to say, that's quite something.
A card that says, grammar, the difference between knowing your shit and knowing your shit. And of course, various other Hindu symbols, which, pretty relevant to the show, if I don't say so.
Yeah, Hindu, huh? Buddhism. Anyway, without further ado, we will get on to what we've been experiencing in the media these last few days.
Yes.
Yes, so I have read an interview in the New Statesman right here with Mikhaila Peterson. There she is, in all of her glory. So, Tiago, do you know much about Mikhaila Peterson?
Other than the fact that she has a podcast and is the daughter of Jordan Peterson. No, I can't say I know particularly a lot about her.
Well, she's an interesting one because she kind of falls into this category of like social media kind of modern influencer. I mean, you can see why I'm struggling with words here. She falls into that kind of suave, modern, influencer aesthetic category.
Yeah.
But then she also falls into the category of like calling that category out, which is what makes her so paradoxical and why I find it interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So she did this this interview for the New Statesman, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, she goes on about how just the general idea of living with having Jordan Peterson as your father, and that newspaper reporters swarming around their house back in 2016 with his kind of rise in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
This is downtown Toronto in a semi-detached house. It just got worse. Dad was on the cover of a newspaper being compared to Hitler. And I think we actually should probably take a moment and maybe I feel like in this modern age, people don't take enough time to realize that celebrities and public intellectuals and people which the media pay attention to, they have families,
Mm-hmm.
And they have private lives. And it doesn't, well, maybe not, you could probably draw a line somewhere, but in almost every single case, I think that private life and those families should be protected,
Mm-hmm.
And not infringed upon.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously, through this interview, there seems to be a deep kind of angst about that infringement, which I personally think is quite sad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she's also interesting in the fact that she has had an incredibly long list of illnesses throughout her life.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll read through a few here. She's had juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile idiopathic arthritis, major depressive disorder. She was bipolar. She had OCD, chronic fatigue, idiopathic hypersomnia, rashes, acne, chronic bronchitis. The list goes on.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you could say with that list, you could make a critique of, perhaps the hyper-diagnosis industry, which we might live in at the moment. But, regardless of, she says she had a hard time remembering things before I was 22 because I was on 7 medications, including antidepressants, which made it difficult to remember things. So things are pretty fuzzy for a lot of my life. But then an interesting point is I don't know if you know this, Tucker. She went on a completely meat diet, only red meat. And I forget the name of what the specific diet's called, but she more or less she eats like 3 steaks a day, and that's
Right.
literally it.
Yeah.
And she still does this.
Does she explain why?
Yeah, well, I think it's I should have probably looked into the diet more before coming into the show, but it's like the physical the physical biological benefits to your blood, to your bones, to your iron levels. Apparently, they've just been astronomically beneficial for her. And then she says, within 6 weeks, I stopped crying in the morning. 5 months later, my lingering anxiety went away. But things kind of became better for her. So yeah, and then in 2018, her father joined in, claiming that within months it cured his depression, anxiety, reflux, fatigue, and gum disease, floaters in his right eye. So it's interesting, and as a vegetarian myself, I'm particularly entertained by this. So I don't know. And then she has this whole bunch of kind of odd political views. So she lives in Arizona, and she can't vote in the US, but she says that if she can, she would vote for Vivek Ramaswamy, the chap we were talking about a few episodes ago. So. But then on the other side, she'd also want to vote for RFK. Which, do you know who RFK is?
Yeah, he's the descendant of JFK. Well, I don't know if he's a direct descendant, but he's Democrat.
Robert, he's a Democrat.
And his big stance is like anti-vax, but for Democrats, I guess. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, more or less. So he's he's Robert Kennedy's son, so JFK's nephew.
Yeah.
But he's so she's just. I actually kind of find her quite refreshing, to be honest. Because she says, I wish my dad would stay away from the politics and would go back into more of the psychological stuff, which I think we agree with as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So she just, she's been through a tough life. She seems to be quite a creative, hardworking woman.
Yeah.
She has a very interesting diet. She says what she thinks. And her political views they're quite something. So I don't know. There you go. There's a little profile.
Of Jordan Peterson's daughter. Well, that's very interesting. I guess I've seen her a lot on like the least fulfilling platforms, that being sort of your TikToks and your Instagram reels and all that sort of stuff, often spewing like, I don't know, what the mainstream right-wing US idea of the time is. But as I said, that's not particularly, may not be completely representative of all of what her views are, and could just be people from those factions, clipping it and posting it. So yeah, it's interesting to hear from you, and interesting about the health stuff as well, because I know that Jordan Peterson has also had a myriad of health issues. So
he was in a comatose state for several weeks, more or less.
Yeah, that's true. Very interesting. I'm also, the meat diet, it's all well and good that it's working for them, and that's that. I don't know how I feel about so openly promoting it. I don't even know if they are so overly promoting it, but like I think it's fair to say most of the science would point for your mental health, for your physical health, that a well-rounded diet is kind of always the best option.
Well, exactly. I mean,
knows?
that's without any knowledge myself. It's you need a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I suppose when you have those extremes of all those illnesses and diseases and everything, and you need something like a shock treatment. Perhaps going on like a major kind of meat-only detox in a short period of time would be good. But obviously they've been doing it for years and years now, and they're still doing it.
And I seem to remember Jordan Peterson talking about it and sort of discussing that it's not just really about the health implications. It's about the discipline of staying on such a strict diet, and that has a bunch of positives for him, which is also interesting. So interesting stuff.
A stoic mental diet.
Yes,
of
meat.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Back to that. It's almost like a kind of cavemen kind of thing, really, when you think about it. Really getting back to your roots.
Well, isn't that well, we're getting a bit off topic, but that's the idea of a paleo diet where you just don't eat anything that's at all processed. You're just eating like your ancestors. But this seems even more extreme than that. But anyway.
Anyway, talking of profiles, do you want to profile Daniel Andrews?
Daniel Andrews. Dictator Dan. Yes, okay. So, for those of you who aren't in the loop with very specific Australian politics, and hey, you could be out of the loop for very specific Australian politics to know this man, who this man is, because he was the premier of Victoria throughout the COVID era. And he was a very controversial figure because, much like Mark McGowan, he was very strict on border closure, very strict on lockdowns, all that sort of stuff, which mask wearing, vaccination.
Within Melbourne.
Within Melbourne specifically. And, for most of Melbourne, being on that progressive side, I guess, was, all good. That's what they wanted. But a lot of people looking in and a lot of people within Greater Victoria, that was very against what they wanted. And I mean, we all know the story of some people thought the COVID lockdowns and that were great, and some people absolutely despised them. And throughout that, he has gained this sort of reputation as this harsh, almost militaristic dictator in a lot of people's opinions, which is why they call him Dictator Dan. And so,
do you have the length of how long he locked down Melbourne for? Because it was one of the longest in the world, right?
Yeah, I think so. It was that. I don't have my phone with me to quickly look it up, but I believe there was 3 lockdowns and all of them were over 3 weeks. So quite substantial. If you got a chance to double check that, Will.
Well, hold on. No, sorry. I've just checked it. The Melbourne lockdown lasted for 246 days.
Was that one, or because I think there was multiple?
Was it?
It might just be counting all of them as one, I guess.
And the 6 lockdowns totaling 262 days.
Oh, well, there you go. Pretty crazy times. And it's in Perth, in WA, we were kind of lucky where we're quite isolated anyway. It's been said a million times, but our lockdowns there are a few of them, but they were relatively short until we sort of, in the end, once enough people were vaccinated, sort of let it rip, so to speak. But Melbourne, it was very strict, and then obviously they let it rip at a later date when, again, once a lot more people were vaccinated, there is discussion on, the vaccination didn't work because a lot of people got it, or other people say the vaccination worked because the symptoms were less severe, there was less hospitalizations. Wherever you stand, you can imagine Dan Andrews as the head of this sort of pretty strong stance, obviously what most people wanted, but still what a lot of people did not want, could be a very stressful, not at all simple task. And what I find interesting is so he stepped down today. That's the main crux of it.
That's the main point of the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
resigned.
He's
Let's get to
resigned
that.
today, and his reason being pretty vague. Politics takes its toll, I guess. Time with family, that sort of stuff. Which reminds me a lot of a
The
few months
usual
ago.
nonsense.
Yeah, a few months ago we heard of oh my god, oh my gosh, my brain's not working today. Bill, who was our
Mark
premier for the
McGowan?
longest time? Yeah,
Oh,
Mark McGowan. He stepped down a few months ago for the same reason. Also, we saw after the lockdown, Gladys Berejiklian stepped down, who was the actually Liberal head of New South Wales. And, across the world, we've seen leaders that.
Jacinta Ardern.
Yeah, Jacinta Ardern, exactly. Stepping down after the stress of the lockdowns. And I think it's just an interesting point of looking at a really easy point to look at in politics and say, hey, these people are actual people, we can talk about them and, criticize them as much as we want, but we need to keep in mind that running through the press about calling people names and all that stuff is, it's our right to do so, but there needs to be the thought that these are people with families. And we need, and we're going to see more people. I guarantee you that we're going to see more COVID era leaders not being kicked out via an election, but stepping down into the future. So I just thought that was interesting. There's not a huge amount of girth to the subject, but Will, do you have any thoughts on it?
But I mean, yeah, I think we've touched on this a little bit before probably a few months ago. But I mean, the modern 24-hour news cycle, the grip which social media has, the hyper intense, hyper interconnected world we live in. I mean, to be a politician at such a high level in such testing times is obviously massively deteriorating on your well-being, on your health, on your mental state. And we look in Britain here. I don't know the stats, but I think there's been a record number of MPs who are stepping down before the next election. Quite a lot of them being young and not being in Parliament for very long at all, just because of the strain it's having on them.
Yeah.
Of course, you can be quite cynical and say, well, the only reason Jacinta stepped down was because there's a New Zealand election coming up quite soon, which actually, not sure if you know this, Tiago, it's happening on the same day as the Voice referendum.
Oh, really?
New Zealand election.
Yeah, there you go.
So maybe we could do a post episode covering both of them. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
little tangent. But yeah, election in New Zealand, Jacinta steps down. Election coming up in Britain, MPs step down. So you can be cynical in that regard, but that almost proves the point that you're. It proves the point that you're being cynical. Therefore, they want to step down. So it's it must be a grueling job. And in regards to, I mean, for those who don't know, I quite like politics, and I might like to see my future career go in that direction. And so I have thought about, these problems and whatnot. And I think one of the solutions is more decentralization, and more delegation. So a lot of, especially in Britain, there is a lot of power in Westminster. So obviously in Australia, you have the federalized structure of your local, state, and federal. But in Britain, we have this really weird mash of there's a plethora of local councils, and then some particular cities like Liverpool and Manchester and the Midlands have mayors, and then London has its own mayoral system, which is different from those other cities, and then Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland all have their own devolved parliaments and assemblies, but then England doesn't actually have its own parliament. It's only completely ruled from the House of Commons, but then the House of Commons. So it's this whole big mess. And really, I think the point I'm trying to make is when there's too much power, too much responsibility, fixated into one kind of position, that obviously just brings a massive strain. And so I think it would be interesting to look at, say, the Irish model, or perhaps the French model, where you have, or the German model, where you have a symbolic president who does a lot of the ceremonial role, and then a prime minister underneath who does a lot of the day-to-day actual work. And, you know, by dividing those things out, you can decrease your workload, the media attention can be split, and you can get on with the job a bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I would actually be really interested to do like a survey of the country with the most happy politicians.
Yeah.
And then find out what their system is.
That would be interesting, yeah.
And see how that works. That would be fascinating.
Yeah.
But there we are.
And not that, you know, a politician's happiness isn't everything, but if they are in a position where they can make decisions that they think are right without worrying about this constant blowback from the media, and someone in a better state of mental health is just going to make better decisions. It's simple as that, really. And yeah, I think what you're saying would be an interesting thing to look at, and I think that's a reason why a lot of these COVID time leaders are so heavily criticized, because the blame isn't split, it's put on them, because they're the person you saw on TV every single day giving press conferences. And yeah, it's interesting.
But yeah, and it can get really, really bad. Like, you know, death threats.
Yeah.
People coming after family members. You know, literal physical assaults. I mean, you see politicians with eggs being thrown at them, or milkshakes being thrown onto them, or things like that. So, and I mean, a part of me does say that's the job. It's a grueling activity. You should be aware of that before you go in. But as we were saying with Mikhaila Peterson's diet, it should be well-rounded.
Yes, well-rounded.
You know, you need a little bit of everything. So there we are. Yeah.
All right.
Moving on from that, we have a rather interesting situation. I don't know how to do a segue here. From Daniel Andrews to India. So, some of the listeners might be aware that there's this fascinating international diplomatic crisis occurring between the countries of India and Canada. And I'm particularly fascinated because you can kind of extrapolate it out to look at a broad aspect of the way that the world's going in regards to geopolitics. So just the basics, and how much do you know about this, Tiago? Because it's really quite a big thing.
I've seen the headlines, and that's about all I can lay claim to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm really fascinated to hear your reaction.
Okay.
So, for those who don't know, I'll do it as a little story. So, there's this lovely little city called Surrey in British Columbia, which is in Canada. And on the 18th of June, there was a Sikh Indian man called Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and he was simply going about his business in the car park of his local Sikh temple, and suddenly a truck turned up. Two masked gunmen jumped out of the truck and gunned him down in the car park, which is, that's insane.
Yeah.
It's especially in Canada, of all places. The last thing you'd expect that to occur is in Canada.
Yes.
So this guy, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, was brutally murdered by these two masked gunmen, which police haven't been able to track. No one knows who they are. And that was on the 18th of June, so a decent while ago. And not yesterday, not that Monday, but the Monday before, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, said in the Canadian House of Commons, and this is a direct quote here, that there are credible allegations potentially linking the Indian government to the assassination of this man.
Right.
Which, if you think about it, that's quite colossal for a state like Canada to fully, the Canadian Prime Minister to fully accuse another Western democratic state within the Commonwealth, within the G20, of assassinating a guy on sovereign Canadian soil.
Yeah.
And so, regardless of who did it, it's why did it happen? So, a little bit of an India profile, because it's a fascinating country. So India at the moment has 1.4 billion people. It's the largest country in the world. It's one of the fastest growing economies. It's one of the largest economies. And it's really in its religious and ethnic statistics that we get into the meat of the detail. So 80% of India is made up of Hindus, so that's 966 million people. 14% of India is made up of Muslims, that's 172 million people. So you know, you really need to take into account. People talk about the Muslim minority within India.
Yeah.
That's still 172 million
Yeah.
people.
Mhm.
Like it's you know, and that's the minority.
Yeah,
And then you've got Christians, they make up 2.3%, that's 27.8 million people. And then you've got the Sikhs, and this is the important bit. So the Sikhs, they're 1.7%, they're 20 million, again, a minority almost reaching the population of Australia.
Yeah.
So the Sikhs are an interesting group. They are a religious group within India. They make up, there's 20.8 million of them, and they're mostly within the north, within this Punjab region, which is kind of up near Pakistan.
Yeah.
And they're quite, and not so much now, more during the 1980s, but there was quite a secessionist movement within the Sikhs. So they wanted a separate nation for themselves, and it would be called Khalistan. And this guy, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, is described by the mainstream Indian state as more or less a terrorist who has been working for militant Khalistani terrorist groups. So the main reason is Narendra Modi, who's the current Prime Minister of India, he's quite a Hindu nationalist. So when I was talking about that Hindu 80% majority, he's highly linked in with them. They're his voter base. That's who he panders to. That's what he promotes. And so he's quite anti that Sikh secessionist movement. So I mean, the basic theory is, and this is also the theory of the Canadian Secret Service, the Canadian the Canadian Secret Service, the Canadian Prime Minister, is that at some point in time there was a decision made within the Indian government, possibly Narendra Modi himself, to assassinate this Sikh man, who I think, to be honest, has become quite pacifist himself and has distanced himself from his more radical past, and to assassinate him on sovereign Canadian soil. And that, I mean, it's a colossal thing, and I really want to drive home the fact that it's not every day that sovereign leaders go around accusing other leaders of assassinating citizens on their own soil.
Deal.
And to make matters worse, Canada and India were just on the cusp of a really brilliant free trade deal worth, tens of billions of dollars for both of them. And I think they're the 10th largest, I think India is Canada's 10th largest trading partner. So there was quite a lot going there. But I mean, I don't know, Tiago, what do you make of that? What do you make of old Narendra Modi and that whole because I mean it's like, I mean, that's what Russia does, you know?
Yeah, that's
what North Korea does. They assassinate, state enemies on other countries' soils. But for India possibly to do it in Canada, it's crazy.
I mean, it's insane. And what's, I think, as you said, makes it even more insane is that Justin Trudeau has come out and said, this is what we reckon it is. And I wonder on what authority he has that. I don't know how, if we know that, because you would be destroying so many, trade opportunities and just general relations to make an accusation like that without having some pretty bloody, solid grounds to, other than, he's a Hindu nationalist, I mean, that's insane. I knew about the fact that the Sikh Indian man was gunned down, but I didn't know about the fact that they think it's related to the government. Now, Will, you have to fill me in on this a little bit. Because this links into what I might talk about later. What are the sort of, what's the human rights situation in India like in general?
In India. So this is another criticism of Narendra Modi. In regards to the fact that he is a Hindu nationalist, so the civil rights of anyone who isn't a Hindu is more or less curtailed to a certain amount, whether you're Muslim, Christian, Sikh, or Buddhist, or whatever else you happen to be. So civil rights wise, things aren't going too great.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't. I need to look into it more. I can't point at specific
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
restrictions, but it's more what they're not doing than what they are doing.
Yeah.
So to give you a specific example, and this, I mean, in regards to Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, this goes way back to 2002. So Narendra Modi was he was the kind of the political leader of the province of Gujarat in India. And in 2002, there were these sectarian Muslim-Hindu riots, so pretty much Muslims and Hindus fighting each other. Official figures put it at something like 970 Muslims killed and then a few hundred Hindus killed. But other reports put the numbers into the thousands. And more or less, Modi, who was the leader of the province at the time, ignored the calls for help for several days before sending in police troops to quell the riots. And I think, I don't know the specifics, but I think there was a particular man or individual in local government who was himself a Muslim, who was continuously calling Modi or something, and Modi was purposely ignoring these calls and was just letting the violence continue and letting it kind of rife up. And that was back in 2002. Something which I'm not sure you might remember this, Tiago, but this was February this year, right? The BBC made a documentary about these riots.
Yeah.
And Indian tax officials raided the BBC offices.
Oh yeah, that's
India.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, we talked about that, didn't we? Yeah.
I think we did touch on
Yeah,
it, but
yeah,
that's
yeah.
linking in again. So Indian tax officials raided the BBC offices. The documentary was completely vetoed. It's not allowed to be shown anywhere in India. So it's, it's quite worrying stuff. It really does, it makes you wonder where the trajectory of India is going. And so that's the kind of the basic on the ground, what's happened within India, what's happened within Canada.
Yeah.
But to kind of extrapolate it out a bit and to also lead into what you're going to be talking about, this kind of shows how India is in such a unique position in between the West, kind of the liberal Western order, and then also this kind of more authoritarian order of China and Russia. So, because India kind of it straddles both horses. So India is a member of the Commonwealth. It is, technically the largest democracy in the world. It has a fully functioning parliament. It has a fully functioning free elections. It has a fully functioning judiciary, a legislature. It has all of those things. And it's incredibly related to Britain through history. It's incredibly related to the West. It's part of the G20 and everything. But on the other hand, it's also pandering more and more, and this kind of goes into Modi's populist authoritarian streak, which seems to be coming out more, pandering more and more to China, to Russia, and to that authoritarian alternative to the liberal West. Just to give you an idea of this, recently in August, do you remember BRICS, the good old organization? BRICS, yeah. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So India is a major partner in the BRICS partnership.
Yeah.
Which again, so you got Brazil, you got Russia, you got India, you got China, you got South Africa. So these are all states which are kind of, more or less non-aligned. They don't really fall under that kind of Western liberal idea set. And recently, at that meeting in August, they extended the invitation to 6 other members. So BRICS became, you don't want to do the acronym because it would be terrible, but they joined in Argentina, Ethiopia, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Iran.
Yeah.
And all of these countries have dodgy civil rights records. I mean, some of them are blatant autocracies. Some of them are blatant theocracies. Nuclear weapons, abuse of minorities. I mean, it's an interesting idea, and so it's fascinating to see where India will go with all of this. because they are really, I mean, they're such a fundamental force within the geopolitics of the world, and at this point in time, as they're expanding, it's very important as to which way they sway. And in regards to which way they sway, it kind of leads on to your point, perhaps, Tiago.
Yeah.
Is that, Justin Trudeau's gone out and he said possible links with the Indian government and everything, and a lot of the West have kind of gone, well, we actually really want to try and keep India into this Western coalition. We want to try and keep peace with India.
Yeah.
We want to try and keep economic and security links with India. Should we really call out? Should we really call this out and go along with Trudeau as much as Trudeau is going?
Mm-hmm.
And that directly links to whatever Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia, has been saying. So would you like to fill us in a little bit there?
Yeah, so interestingly, speaking about all this, and this it might have been a few months ago, but as I was doing research for this referendum that we've got coming up, there was a few things I saw, and it reminded me of this, and I was like, if we're not talking about the referendum this podcast, I want to talk about this, because it's quite fascinating, really, and it really well links into what you're saying. But a few months ago, there was like this closing of this trade deal. I might be simplifying things a lot there, but that's what it was. And in a big stadium, they had Albanese was there, a few other representatives from our government, and there was Modi and a few other representatives from his government. And literally, it's like the debates that we're talking about in the US, like lighting, Indian music, crazy big production value. And Albo introduces Modi as Modi is one of the greatest leaders in the world. He's brought this many people out of poverty, just really, really talking him up. Which, it had a lot of people being like, hang on, aren't we, look at these human rights records and that sort of stuff. Is this really where we want to be sitting with this guy? But anyway, that all happened. Modi came out, they shook hands, all these photos, all these speeches, all this good stuff. Basically, just congratulating the Indian government for all they've done. And, just kind of a weird thing that no one really, they didn't have to do that. Like, they could have, closed this deal. Thank you for doing the deal with us. Move on. But instead, they've chosen to go all out and, thanking him for all.
It was a full musical bonanza. I mean, it was in a stadium, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Full production budgets, lighting, music, a crowd. I mean, and this is the thing with Modi, is wherever he goes in the world, because there's quite a large Indian diaspora, he is one of the only real political leaders who's able to whip up such a frenzy and such a crowd, and people just absolutely love him. And it is, it's fascinating. I mean, didn't Albanese, he called him the boss at one point, didn't he?
He did, that's correct. I forgot about that, yes.
Bruce Springsteen, he called Modi the boss. I mean, it's quite incredible for a government which was raiding the BBC's, offices in India for producing a documentary where it criticizes him, for the Australian Prime Minister then go call that man the boss.
Yeah. Anyway, so from there, basically, there was this pretty viral interview. Some of our Australian listeners may have seen it. David Kosh, or Koshi from Sunrise, did an interview with Albo about this. And it was, quite frankly, I really like Albo, but it was really embarrassing. He was asking him, he kept trying to ask him, okay, can we address the human rights issues? Again, I think he brought up the raiding of BBC offices, all this sort of stuff. And Albo was just like, India has brought this many people out of poverty. Not even addressing the question, just rewording it and then saying about all the people that are brought out of poverty. So that was really weird. So on my research, I got more sidetracked with this, and I thought, hang on, why is Albo saying such, glowing things? Why does he not just go, look, there is some human rights issues, question marks maybe, but, there's been a lot of positive development in India. We also value them as a trade partner, blah, blah, blah. Why is he just going straight down this line? And then I found out that the largest non-white Australian group that vote for the Labor Party is actually nationalist nationalist Hindus.
Hindus.
Yes,
Oh.
specifically, which is
that's
really interesting, and it makes a lot of sense.
That's fascinating because it's the opposite in Canada. It's the Sikhs
Right.
who vote for Trudeau in Canada.
Right.
So the largest group of Sikhs outside of India are in Canada. There's 770,000 of them, and they are massively in favor of Trudeau.
Right. Okay. That
And then
makes
it's
a
the
lot of
Hindu
sense.
nationalists who are in favor. So they're Labour voting, are they?
They're, yeah, because
mostly
Hindu Indians make up like quite a large percentage of the working class in Australia. And obviously Labor is kind of the idea is that they are the representatives of the working class. So they're really always trying to pander to that group, and because of that, they're a large voting group. So if Albo had have come on TV and said, Modi's human rights records are questionable and all this stuff, there's a big chance that there would be a lot of those people that would just be instantly switched off. And it's a political move. While I don't agree with it whatsoever, I do think it's, he's in a hard spot there. And then it's also what you were saying when I was looking into it of, in the West, we really are valuing these connections at the moment. If we completely lose India, that's the second largest country in the world that's no longer aligned with us anymore. So you've got China and India.
But it's by population, it is the largest now. It overtook China.
Oh, did it? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just thought that was interesting, and that actually ties in super well to what you said. So good job on us there.
Yeah. There we go.
But yeah,
to throw some more shade at Albo, have a listen to this. This was journalists asking Albanese about Trudeau's allegations about the possible assassination. And so this particular journalist was questioning Albanese about welcoming Modi with that whole cheering audience and the 20,000 people in the arena back in May. And he was saying, why did you call him the boss? Like, look at this guy. He's got this horrible human rights record. He's doing these things in Canada. You call him the boss. What's going on here? And Albanese replied by saying, seriously, you should chill out a bit. He said, we're at a venue where Bruce Springsteen played the last time I was there, and I made the point that the reception he got from the community, which was a very broad-based community from the Indian diaspora, welcomed him very strongly. It's as simple as that. So I welcomed Prime Minister Modi to Australia as I welcome other guests to Australia as well. And then he blatantly told the journalist to seriously, you should chill out a bit.
Yeah.
So again, with what you're saying about that interview there on the breakfast show, he is just pandering around the question, really.
Yeah,
he's not. And it is, what we were saying before, you're between a rock and a hard place, because in this world that we are facing, you have to make those decisions between human rights and human rights and economics. That's just a horrible thing for me to say.
True,
but furthermore, I actually have a little bit of first-hand experience of this. So where I am on the Isle of Arran, in this resort I'm working at, we actually have a very large group of Indian and Pakistani chefs and waiters and whatnot. There's a really large cohort of them, and there's one just a few doors down from me, and then I work quite closely with another one, and I've been talking to a few of them, and usually my first question, it's funny, if I meet a French person, my first question is, what's your view on Macron? And if I meet an Indian, my usually first question is, what's your view on Modi?
Right, yeah.
One of them is a massive Modi supporter, thinks what he's done for the economy, what he's done for India on the world stage, how he's revitalized people out of poverty. It just thinks it's absolutely brilliant. And then another guy who I was talking to is a lot more reserved and was, quite, people look on Modi as a god, but they shouldn't. He's far too populist. He's far too powerful. His human rights record is suspicious. And I mean, that again opened my eyes literally to people I was talking to here on the Isle of Arran on the west coast of Scotland. It's like Modi's even divisive here. So, you know, people talk about Russia, people talk about China, people talk about the US, people talk about Britain. India is really, really an important country to look at.
Especially at the moment,
Especially at the moment, and definitely even more in the future, just to scope where the globe is going. So yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, I wonder if Trudeau might have actually been able to. I don't know, because it's difficult when you say our security agencies have fully credible evidence to put up this claim, but obviously we can't reveal that because of security agencies. It's it's really difficult. Chris Hipkins, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, I think he was quite dodging the question as well. And I mean, to make matters even better, at the G20 summit in India, Trudeau's plane had a technical fault, and he had to wait in India for 2 days after the summit.
That's so awkward. It's like,
oh yeah, I'm still here.
Boy,
which is pretty funny. But yeah, so there we go. I mean, and what I was saying before with BRICS, Argentina, Ethiopia, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, all of that group, India's pivotal in that. It's quite something. So there we go. Watch this space. I think, especially if more Sikh activists end up being killed in weird parts of the globe, that would be really quite suspicious.
Not that we hope for that, but
there was one in Pakistan not that long ago, which of course is a bit, obviously on the border with India, so that's a little, I suppose, more explainable, which probably isn't the right way to go say it, but
we know what you mean.
That a bit more than someone in Canada. But yeah, I suppose, I don't know, should we probably wrap it up there? Are we happy with that?
Yeah, what time are we at there, Will?
We're about 46 minutes.
Yeah, that should be good.
Yes,
I had one more thing, but I think it will actually tie into next week's episode, maybe. I know I said this at the end of last episode, and maybe the episode before that. But are we going to do it, Will? Next episode? Are we going to answer our good friend Daniel's prayers and finally talk about The Voice?
Yeah, perhaps we will.
Okay.
Hopefully. 14th of October is the referendum for those of you listening.
Yes, so
it's also the general election in New Zealand.
I mean, for all our New Zealand voting audience, that will be very valuable piece of advice. I just want to say before, and I'll reinstate this at the beginning of the next episode, but before we do it, I just want to say we're not going to be telling you what to think or what to vote. This is just our opinions, and I don't want to speak for Will, but there's a lot here, and neither of us are experts on it. So we're going to try our best to cover it.
We haven't even gotten to the episode. We're already providing a disclaimer.
We're probably going to focus mostly on what this could mean, what this could look like, and then look at both campaigns, where their strengths, where their weaknesses are. Not necessarily telling you to vote yes or no. But we will see you then. Will, any closing thoughts?
No, not particularly.
All right.
Live long and prosper. We'll see you. We'll see you next week.
Wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. Of Ukraine.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.